I had a really incredible coaching client who routinely tells me, like, you're the reason that I'm able to stay home and homeschool my kids and also run a business.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Business Briefs. This is where we indulge in bite-sized business and legal strategies to level up your business. And today we have a very amazing guest who I happened to meet at a conference recently that I attended. She's lovely. She has tons of words of wisdom. So welcome to Business Brief, Maddie Pashong. I'm so excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm pumped to be here.
Yeah, I feel like it was so nice connecting with you, and it was so nice hanging out with you too. And, we went to the Reset conference earlier in the year, and it was just, I walked away with a lot of good connections and friendships. It wasn't just like, hey, I know you, but like truly we hung out and talked about life, just like what we were doing just before the recording. So I know you have so much amazing, wisdom to share with all of us here today. But before we do that, tell us what you do. Give me your 60-second elevator pitch.
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Maddie Pashong. I am a brand photographer and coach based in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I have been a photographer for about 10 years, and I've been doing only brand photography for about 4. So made that pivot a few years ago and have absolutely loved it, never looked back. I also have a podcast called Take It Personally, which is all about personal branding. And then my husband and I own a photography studio in town as well called White Space, and we rent that out to other photographers in our area because in South Dakota, there's about 9 months out of the year that you can't take pictures outside. So we need a backup plan.
I love that you found the problem and you've created solutions.
Big problem.
Speaking of problems and solutions, how did you figure out that branding is the niche that you need to be in?
Oh my gosh, so much trial and error. It was a lot of trying different types of photography and being like, nope, that's not it. Or, okay, I think this is it. And then after a couple of years, nope, actually, that's not it. And at the time, it felt really futile. And I was really discouraged by it because I had so many friends who very clearly found their niche. And I was just like, gosh, it's not newborns, it's not weddings, it's not families. Like none of this is what I want to do. But I really love photography. It just kind of felt like I was a little aimless. And once I found brand photography, I was like, oh, this is totally it. Like I had a background in marketing. I have always loved the online world of business. And so it felt like that was what it was supposed to be. And I actually came into it kind of by happenstance. I was shooting weddings at the time. And one of my favorite parts of wedding days was connecting with the other vendors and the community of wedding vendors in the area. And I always loved sharing photos with them after the wedding day. So I would send photos to like the venue coordinator or the planner, the person who created the stationery, the graphic designer. I would send them photos afterward. And that was so fulfilling to me to be able to see them use these images. And then about at the same time, I started showing more photos of myself in my own social media feed. It's changed a bit over the years, but at the time, photographers were very much behind the scenes on their Instagram. Like you would scroll and be like, I don't know what this photographer even looks like because it was just all their work. And I just kind of started experimenting really and bringing a little bit more of the personal into my business. And it went over really well. Other people noticed and started asking me to take photos like that for their business. And I didn't know it was called brand photography until probably years later, but here I am.
Yeah. And I mean, I personally believe in it so much, the brand photography aspect of it, because I want to kind of talk a little bit more about that. Why is brand photography so important as opposed to just buying stock images or using stock images? And how does it help you stand out as a brand?
Yeah, I think personal branding, meaning like that can be through photography, it can be through showing your face on Instagram stories, whatever. I think it's the best way to stand out in a saturated market because there are probably a lot of people doing the same thing that you're doing. And you are the best differentiator. Like you are that market disruption. I realized pretty quickly because I live in a community with a lot of very talented photographers and a lot of them in different niches than me, different strengths than me. And I realized really quickly that if I was going to compete on just talent, it just wasn't going to work. Like I'm talented, but like I'm not Ansel Adams or anything like that. And so I realized, well, if I can't do anything else, I can show people my personality. I can attract people who want to work with someone like me. And that's really what it's about. It's bringing the personal back into business, because at the end of the day, people want to work with people. They want to work with someone that they like, that they feel like they can talk to, have a cup of coffee with. And so if you're able to make that connection, then you're automatically higher on the list than someone who they've never met or don't even know what they look like.
Yeah, brand photography can be such a game changer for your company because truly you're representing your brand through the images that you're putting out there for people to connect with you on. And so when somebody is trying to figure out if they should start their brand photography or they shouldn't, what are some things that you should be thinking about, like when you're about to get into that track?
Yeah, that's a great question. For a while, I kind of thought, especially because I'm priced a bit higher for my area. Again, I live in the Midwest, and I thought for a while that my ideal client was somebody who had been in business for a longer amount of time. Like that's somebody who's going to be ready to invest four figures in a brand session is somebody who's been around for a while. And I have actually found that to not be true. It's kind of more about where they're at mentally than where they're at in their business. I work with a lot of people who are just getting started, and they come to me and will say things like, I want to feel more confident about the brand that I'm putting out into the world. I want to look like the professional that I am. I have all these credentials. I have all these degrees. I made this amazing business plan. I want that to show through my visual imagery. And so that's been really interesting to see, is like, it's not necessarily people who've been doing this for 10, 15 years. It's people who are just like, no, I'm taking myself seriously. Like I'm stepping up and I want this glow up and I want it to be a visual representation of where I'm at.
Yeah. So my question is, aside from, connecting with somebody or the people that in your community or your ideal client, how else does brand photography help a person's business?
I think it legitimizes it. And that's not to say that brand photography is the only way to do that. I think any good business has a lot of irons in the fire in that way. But so often as business owners, what we are asking our clients to do is invest in themselves in some capacity, right? Especially if we're a service-based business. So we're saying invest in yourself, spend money on self-care or whatever it might be. And that's what we're asking as business owners. But if your imagery doesn't match that like you've invested in yourself and you've invested in your brand, then there's a disconnect there. And I don't think that people even necessarily can articulate that, but it's like they know in the back of their mind, like something isn't right here. This person wants me to spend $500, $1,000, whatever on this really amazing service, but they're using a stock photo from Shutterstock. Like this doesn't make sense to me. They'll be able to catch that disconnect.
That is such a great point. It's such a great point because I feel like, especially for smaller businesses, it's really important because big businesses, you already know them. The reputation's there. So if they use stock images, it's kind of like what the old school way of doing websites, right? Having stock images from there, purchasing them, downloading them, whatever. Companies that are known, it's fine. Like you kind of already know their reputation through many other mediums. But for a small business, I think brand photography is really important. Now, say you have a client coming in for the first time doing brand photography. What are some things that they need to prepare on their end and some things that they need to think about when they are about to do that session with you?
Yeah. The biggest thing, and I don't think this is exactly what you're asking, but I'm going to say it anyway. The biggest thing is that I think a lot of people feel like I'm going to wait to book a brand photography session until I've been in business longer, until I lose the weight, until I feel more confident. Like it's the same excuse we have before booking family photography, really.
Yeah.
And I want to make it very clear that confidence does not come before brand photography sessions. It does not come before you book it. I find that time and time again with my clients. Like my clients do not get in front of the camera confident. Like they are scared, they're nervous, and they're not feeling that feeling of confidence until I really turn my camera around and I'm like, this is what you look like. And then that confidence builds and they get their gallery back and the confidence builds and they use their photos and the confidence builds. So it's not something that you're going to feel like Potentially, it's not something you're going to feel like super excited and confident about before you do it. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're broken. Some things to think about when you're booking a session are really thinking about your brand as a whole. So who are the people that you're serving and how are you serving them? What does the 5-year plan of your business look like? Like, what direction are you going in? If you are a service provider and there are some services that you really don't like offering, you can see yourself kind of phasing them out. But there are other things that you really want to focus on and push and market. Like, let's focus on those things so we can get really good imagery around those and not waste our time on stuff that you actually don't want to book anyway. A lot of the time, people are coming to me for social media content or website content. And what I always tell people is you're going to book more of what you're showing. And so what do you want to book? Like, what do you want the action to be that people take? Let's show that. And I send over a pretty comprehensive questionnaire before brand shoots, asking a lot of these questions. And then once I get it back, it's my job to be like, okay, one of the things that you do is you answer emails like during the day. How can we show that in a way that is more creative than sitting on a laptop answering emails? Like, how do we show communication and collaboration and like these concepts in a bigger way than just you on a computer?
Gosh, I love that. I mean, so I do brand photography like a lot because I truly believe in it. And I also
Yeah.
believe that my images should portray who I am and my team and not just random people that don't exist in my team. And so I think also just on another level of diversity, if you are trying to show that also those ethos into your business, this is a great way to do it. And not just like plop it in there just for the sake of plopping it, but make it look genuine as to how you also do that in your own business. And
Absolutely.
and that was just like a total side remark because that's been another way in the past that, people have talked about how to include DEI into your business as well. So I'm going to shift the gears a little bit because you've given us great tips on brand photography, why it's important, how to prepare for it, and of course the confidence. I mean, I promise you, when I walk in, I'm still like, oh my goodness, like this is so embarrassing. You feel embarrassed
Totally.
because it's not you. I'm not like
Yes.
a supermodel walking around with photographers always around me. And so it's like so awkward and uncomfortable. But, the photographers generally, my brand photographer generally, like, you just make it so comfortable and you feel like,
Yeah.
okay, I got this. But that's the photography side of it. I want to talk a little bit more about the branding now because you give amazing coaching on how to brand yourself, how to stand out in a market. In fact, that was one of the presentations that you were speaking about at the Reset conference. And so tell us a little bit more about that. How did you get into that space? Where did you find the problem? And obviously you provided the solution. How did that happen? And then what are some of your tips?
Yeah. So I have been really focused on personal branding in my business for a long time, but it took me a really long time to figure out that's what it was called. And then even further than that, to like really develop a system around it. Because I think for so many things that come naturally to us that we are good at, we just kind of like blow them off as like, well, I'm just naturally like, I'm good at that. And so we don't spend much more time thinking about it. And I kept getting comments from people specifically about like, I love how you show up on Instagram. I love how you do Instagram. And so for a long time, I was like, okay, well, maybe that's my thing. Maybe I'm teaching people about Instagram. And very clearly and quickly, it became like, that's not my thing. Like, I'm not a tools person. I love Instagram. I'm not going to be able to teach people like, these are the different kinds of posts to make on Instagram. Like, I don't care that much. And so it was a lot of work with myself, with a coach to kind of figure out like, okay, what is this that makes me different of how I'm showing up online? And also, what am I teaching my clients when they come to me for photography, but then I'm also helping them with their own personal branding. And what I've put together is a system of personal branding that really comes down to 4 parts. And that is focusing on your reputation, your rapport, your relationships, and then letting it refine over the years. And so that's really the system of personal branding that I teach, because the reality is it is a lot bigger than Instagram. You can't just show up on Instagram and have a really great presence on social media and expect your personal brand to be stellar. There's so much happening behind the scenes. There's so much happening out in your community, whatever it might be, that also impacts your personal brand. And it's all connected. It's an ecosystem.
Gosh, I'm so glad you said that, because lately I've just felt like a lot of people, business owners, put all of their eggs in that social media basket, especially Instagram or TikTok. And just recently with all the stuff that's happening with TikTok, and then all these other things that are happening on the legal side of privacy world and whatnot, you cannot have your entire marketing plan sitting on social media. And you're right, like, there's so much more to that behind the scenes. And not just behind the scenes, even there's just so much more to a marketing plan is how you're showing up in your community. I love that you said that, because a lot of people forget that that's important too. We have this grocery store here called HEB. It's amazing if you've never heard about it, but the way they show up for their community when there is crisis happening, nobody else shows up like them. And that's what you know them for. It's like, yeah, they have great produce. Yeah, it's farm to market type situation, but they show up for their community, and you're like, I want to support that.
Yeah, I think, the age that we currently live in with everything so digital and online, I think it's a wonderful thing. Like we have so many more advantages than people who have come before us because of that. However, I think that we tend to get a little bit too caught up in the bells and whistles of like the next platform. Like now I'm hearing about Lemonade, and you have to get on Lemonade, and like this is a new platform that, like, at the end of the day, it's about connection. Like that's what it comes back to. How are you making people feel? Just like a brand makes people feel a certain way, like you have likely had interactions in your life with a brand like Nike or Amazon or whatever. Just when you order from them, the feelings that come up with those interactions, it's the same with a personal brand. It's the same with a human being. And that's really what it comes down to. And so I'm very passionate about, like, it doesn't matter what platform that you're on, like whatever platform you want to be on is probably the right platform for you. But how are you showing up there? How are you connecting with people? How are you serving them? How are you showing up in your community? Like that's what we really need to be focused on. The rest of the stuff is probably going to change over the years, and that's okay. It doesn't need to throw you off.
Right. I agree with you. So going back to, the 4 ways that you were talking about earlier, can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Yeah. So your reputation is what I typically start with. And this is really your positioning in the market. So it's understanding who you are and why you're different and what you want to be known for. I think that often people think of like positioning or niching in their business, and they get really nervous because they feel like, oh, if I do this, if I niche into this thing, it means that that's all I'm ever going to be known for. And I'm never going to get calls for anything else. And the reality is a clear positioning statement or just clear positioning in your market is actually one of the best ways to continue getting more people in the doors of your business. It absolutely does not mean that you won't get calls for other types of service. And this is especially true in photography. I've been only a brand photographer for about 4 years. And I still, on at least a monthly basis, it used to be a lot more frequently, would get inquiries for wedding photography, family photography, newborn photography, just because people know me as a photographer, because I've positioned myself where like they know my name. And when those inquiries come in, I can decide what I want to do with them, but it makes people remember me. It's so much easier to remember someone who solves a very specific problem and is positioned in a specific way than it is to remember 50,000 photographers who can do anything, who can shoot whatever it is you want to shoot, like they'll be there.
I love that.
So that's reputation. Rapport is really focused heavily, especially now, on content. So the connection that you're making with people. And a lot of the time, again, that's through content, that's online. So what are the things that you're saying? How are you bringing the personal side into your content? And this really depends on your comfort level and what you want to share. I'm very purposeful about not making my kids part of my brand. Like they are, this always comes up with moms. Like, well, I can't have a personal brand because I don't want my family to be online. They are not the same thing. You do not have to have your family as part of your brand to have a personal brand. What it really means is just showing that you are a human, and you can do that in a million ways. I literally signed a client the other day, and she was like, oh, I was scrolling back in your feed and I had like one photo of my family at Christmas. And she was like, I didn't realize that you were a mom. And I'm like, honestly, that's great, because while my kids, while my kids are a huge part of my, like, why I do business the way that I do, their privacy is really important to me.
Yeah.
And I don't want them all over my social media feed. So you get to decide what that looks like, but it's really just humanizing your brand. It's giving yourself a break. It's not just talking about business all the time. It's creating connection over things that are human. One of the best ways to do this is to show up on Instagram stories. And you can do, again, you can do this a million different ways. You can show your face. You can not show your face. You can show your workspace. You can share memes. You can share funny GIFs. Like, there's a million ways to do this, but it's really just what you're most comfortable with.
I like that you distinguish that it's not about the family all the time. It's just humanizing yourself.
Just humanizing. Yep, exactly.
That's really important. And so we have reputation, we have rapport, and then we have relationships. Yeah. And then refine after that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So relationship, this really comes down to your client experience. So there's kind of two parts to this. It's the stuff that happens before you invite people in to work with you, and it's the stuff that happens once they're a client. So it's things like, what does your onboarding process look like? Are people able to access your pricing easily? Are they able to like access your contact form and get in touch with you? Did they hear back from you right away? Like, what does that look like? And then on the flip side, once they're in your sphere and they're a client, what does your client experience look like? Are you answering their questions before they ask them? Are you giving them a really easy and clear experience? Are you telling them this is what you can expect now? Are you sending a thank you card or a gift? That's honestly, like I mentioned it, it's very low on the totem pole. I think you can be very thoughtful without spending a ton of money on gifts. This really comes back to communication. And I think for creatives, this is really hard. And so if you do one thing, focus on your communication with your clients and watch your reputation improve. And that's the cool thing about this system, is that as you work on all the different parts, the other parts are improved. Like as you work on your client experience, your reputation gets better because those people are offboarded and they tell their friends and they tell their family. And then the very last part is refine. And really all that means is give yourself the freedom to change your mind. Understand that your brand is going to look different over the months and over the years that you're in business. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're allowed to evolve. Your business can evolve with you.
I completely agree with that. You know, things change, life happens. And it's okay. Sometimes we have such a fixed mindset that it has to be this way.
Yes.
Life happens and it's okay. Those shift and turns are just getting you ready for the next big thing that's supposed to be coming your way. So I thank you so much. That's always so enlightening. And I like how you break it down so much and you just kind of give also the permission, because sometimes we just need to hear that permission that it's okay this way. And brand photography is so important to me and to my business also. I think it's just really important to always portray your brand the way you are. And nothing wrong with stock images, but just make sure they also align with your brand at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. I have used some really great stuff. There are such amazing stock image services now compared to 10 years ago. Like there are some incredible memberships to be a part of. And as a photographer, I've used them like on client guides or as inspo boards for brand photography clients. There's nothing wrong with stock images, but I think that when they're used in combination with really curated personal brand photography and personal stock photography, that's when they're the most impactful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me, speaking of the business and some challenges that we might have in our business, has there ever been a moment where you're like, man, I wish I'd done that in the legal world? Or you're like, oh gosh, I can't believe this just happened?
Oh my gosh. I was just telling a friend about this the other day because I was helping her with some of her onboarding. And she's like, okay, does this mean that people are going to sign the contract and pay me before we start planning their session? And I was like, yes. What have you been doing? Yes. What
Why
has
haven't you been doing that?
she was like, I know it's bad. But she commented on how I'm very planful with that. Like people need to pay me and they need to sign a contract before we engage in
Mhm.
working together. And I was like, honestly, one of the very first interactions that I ever had with a client, it was, I think, the second senior photography client that I had ever worked with. And ironically and thankfully, it was right after I had a bunch of contracts done for me. And this was early on in business. So this was like a big deal, a big investment, but I just felt
Right.
like I needed to. And I had a really unhappy client where I over delivered and really like went above and beyond, and they still
Mhm.
were not happy. And it didn't make me feel good, but I knew that I was safe because of the contract that I had
Right.
in place. And so I learned that lesson really early on. And to be honest with you, I have relearned it. Unfortunately, there was actually a situation last summer where I was working with a new client, a potential client, really. And there was just a lot of back and forth. And so I was out of my regular like invoice contract. Then we start planning.
Mhm.
And we had started planning, and they were having some issues with the contract that they weren't super forthright about. And so ultimately, like 2 days before we were supposed to shoot this session, they couldn't sign the contract. And I lost out on about a $5,000 project.
Oh my.
During a time of year where I don't take a lot of clients. And so
Right.
I was kind of banking on that $5,000, and it really threw me off track for a while.
Oh no.
So it's something that I've learned a few times. And every time I'm like, okay, this is why we have the system that we have.
Yeah, yeah. It's not just having the contract, but it's using it the right way and putting it into the process
Exactly.
at the right timing as well. And
Hmm.
of course, like contracts are not foolproof. Like they don't say
Right.
nobody can get upset. They don't say that there's no dispute. It actually, your contract should take into consideration a dispute and then what to do if there was one.
Hmm.
But it just helps with knowing that there is something there that's giving you some safeguarding and, hedging
Exactly.
hedging your bets on this one particular
Yes.
project. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think, contracts are really essential. I've also met some people and they're definitely like maybe newer in their business or they've been doing it and things haven't been hectic, but it's truly like, oh, so contract money, like when I'm like, okay, so this is the process we need to follow. This is how it should be done. Now, you don't have to take all the money up front because it just may not make sense, but just
Hmm.
you can take a non-refundable advance just to book the date for them and,
Yep.
to secure that spot.
And that's exactly what I do. I really like payment plans in my business because it helps
Yeah.
me plan my revenue more easily. So I don't typically take a full payment before we start working together, but I do require usually a 50% retainer. And that works really well with revenue planning. And it also lets me know that like this person is serious. Like we're ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Great ideas. Well, I have really enjoyed learning so much from you today. But before we exit, I always ask all my guests, what is your anchor? What holds you down when there's chaos around you?
Ooh, that is such a good question. You know, I really feel like in recent years, it's become more clear to me that what I'm doing is making a difference. Like I have worked both on the coaching side and on the photography side. I have been so fortunate to work with people who have then told me after the fact, like, these are the ways in which you've helped me. I had a really incredible coaching client who routinely tells me, like, you're the reason that I'm able to stay home and homeschool my kids and also run a business. I've had photography clients tell me, like, I feel so much more confident since my session with you. And it's like, it's impacting how I'm showing up in other areas of my life. I am so passionate about women showing up as themselves and just being a force in the world because nothing bad happens when women make more money. And if I can be a little piece of that, giving people the confidence to do exactly that, like that keeps my butt in the chair on the worst days.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's so inspiring. Thank you. And how can we connect with you? How can the listeners say, Maddie, we love you?
I am too active on Instagram. So Instagram's a great place. I'm at Maddie Pashang on Instagram. My website is maddiePashang.com, and my podcast drops every other week on Thursday, and it's called Take It Personally. So Instagram for sure. And then a couple other avenues in there too.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to have all the links available for everybody. And this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today on Business Briefs.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.